Servers don't breathe near billion-dollar conversations. The sentence landed sharper than the crystal fork resting beside the investor's plate. For one suspended second, every sound inside the private dining room disappeared. No clink of glasses. No low jazz from the ceiling speakers. No whisper of polished shoes on imported marble. Only the hush that follows arrogance when it believes it owns the room. Richard Whitmore leaned back in his leather chair, one hand draped over a contract thick enough to buy city blocks, the other gesturing carelessly toward the door. His cufflinks caught the candlelight like two small mirrors. Around him sat men and women who managed funds, moved markets, and wore expressions practiced in expensive elevators. They smiled because he smiled. They laughed because he expected it. And standing beside the table with a silver tray balanced steady in both hands was Aaliyah Carter. Black uniform pressed clean, collar slightly worn, name tag polished bright enough to reflect the room that refused to see her. She had served tables in Midtown for 14 months, 6 nights a week, often 12 hours on her feet, learning the habits of power the way some people study weather. Rich people always announced themselves before they spoke. Some with watches, some with perfume, some with the way they never looked at the hands pouring their water. Richard was the loudest kind. Aaliyah did not move when he dismissed her. She only lowered the tray to the side station with a softness that somehow sounded louder than his voice. A chilled bottle of sparkling water sweated onto white linen. A candle flickered once and steadied. "You heard me," Richard said, not bothering to turn fully toward her. "Take the tray and wait outside." He said it as if people could be folded and stored like napkins. Several guests glanced down, pretending discomfort was manners. One woman adjusted a diamond bracelet and studied the menu she had already memorized. At the far end of the table, Daniel Pierce, Richard's attorney, kept his eyes on the stack of papers before him. Too carefully. That was the first thing Aaliyah noticed. The second was the logo on the top page. Carter. Urban Holdings. Her father's company. The old blue crest had been reduced by time and photocopy toner, but she knew every line of it. She had seen it embossed on coffee mugs in a tiny office when she was 9 years old, back when her father still believed hard work could survive greed. Her fingers tightened around the linen napkin in her hand. The room blurred for half a heartbeat, replaced by memory. Cardboard boxes stacked in a hallway. Her mother speaking softly on the phone after midnight. Bills spread across a kitchen table beneath a single bulb. Her father saying, "Sometimes they don't want what you built. They want you gone so they can take it cheaper." He died 2 years later of a sudden stroke at 53, carrying stress heavier than any casket should hold. The company vanished within months. Assets sold. Records buried. Nobody answered calls. Nobody apologized. And now its name sat under Richard Whitmore's manicured hand like a trophy. "Aaliyah," came the maitre d's cautious whisper from the doorway. She did not answer. Her eyes had moved to the signature page protruding halfway from the folder. She could see only part of the inked line, but it was enough to make the air turn cold in her lungs. Harold Carter. Her father's name. Signed in a date 3 years after the funeral. Daniel Pierce finally looked up. His jaw tightened so slightly most people would miss it. Aaliyah did not. She had learned long ago that truth often entered a room through tiny cracks, a delayed blink, a hand covering a page, a voice that grew too casual. Richard lifted his wineglass and smirked at the silence he had created. "Why are you still here?" he asked. Candlelight stretched across the polished table like thin gold bars. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glittered in the rain, millions of lights pretending every story below them was clean. Aaliyah took one slow breath. Her pulse was steady now. Fear had burned off and left something clearer behind. She stepped forward once, just enough for every guest to notice. The silverware seemed suddenly too bright. "Because, Mr. Whitmore," she said, voice calm enough to stop the room again. "Before I leave, I think your lawyer should explain why my dead father just signed your contract." Daniel Pierce's water glass slipped half an inch in his hand. Richard's smile remained on his face for 1 second longer than it belonged there. Then the private dining room doors began to open. The doors opened slowly enough to stretch every heartbeat in the room. A woman in a charcoal suit stepped inside first, silver hair pinned neatly back, posture straight as a ruler. Behind her came the restaurant general manager, then a young assistant carrying a leather portfolio. The woman's eyes moved once across the table, taking inventory of faces, contracts, glasses, fear. They settled on Aaliyah. "There you are," she said calmly. "I have been calling your phone for 20 minutes. Nobody spoke. Richard Whitmore glanced from the woman to Aaliyah, irritation returning like a reflex. "Excuse me," he said. "This is a private meeting." The woman did not look at him. Privacy becomes complicated when forged signatures enter commerce. Her voice was low, but the room bent toward it. Daniel Pierce's shoulders stiffened. A bead of water slid down the side of his untouched glass and darkened the linen beneath it. Aaliyah exhaled slowly. She recognized the woman at once. Eleanor Grant, senior counsel for the State Commercial Fraud Division. 3 months earlier, Aaliyah had mailed a packet of old records, unpaid tax filings, dissolved shell companies, and one handwritten timeline connecting her father's missing business to a chain of acquisitions that somehow always benefited the same investors. She never expected an answer. Yet here Eleanor Grant stood under chandelier light, carrying the answer herself. Richard forced a smile meant for television cameras and campaign donors. "I think there has been some misunderstanding." "There has," Eleanor said, "but not on our side." She stepped to the table and opened the portfolio. Inside were copies of deeds, transfer ledgers, bank authorizations, and incorporation papers stamped in blue. Paper made a soft sound as she spread them beside Richard's contract, like cards in a game already lost. "Carter Urban Holdings was dissolved improperly," she said. "Its assets were rerouted through 3 entities linked to Whitmore Strategic Partners. 2 signatories were deceased at the time documents were executed. One of them was Harold Carter." Richard's jaw hardened. "You cannot walk into a dinner and accuse me of anything." "I did not accuse you," Eleanor replied. "I documented you." Someone near the center of the table coughed into a napkin. Another guest quietly slid his chair back 2 inches, as if distance could erase attendance. Outside the windows, rain streaked the glass in silver lines. Inside, nobody reached for food. The steaks cooled untouched. The asparagus leaned forgotten against porcelain. Daniel Pierce finally found his voice. "My client has always operated within legal boundaries." Eleanor turned to him for the first time. "Then why did you bill 600 hours to a company that did not legally exist?" His face changed in layers. Color leaving. Confidence cracking. Calculation arriving too late. Aaliyah watched him the way she had watched customers inspect wine labels they could not pronounce. Carefully. Desperately. Richard stood, smoothing the front of his tailored jacket. "This is harassment." "Sit down," said one of his own investors from across the table. The words came quiet, almost embarrassed, but they landed harder than any shout. Richard froze halfway upright. The speaker was Leonard Shaw, a pension fund director whose money represented teachers, firefighters, retired city workers. He removed his glasses and folded them slowly. "Did you use our capital to buy stolen property?" No one rescued Richard this time. No laughter. No nodding heads. No chorus of expensive loyalty. Only candle flames and breathing. Aaliyah remained beside the service station, hands folded lightly in front of her. She had imagined revenge differently when she was younger. Louder, hotter, more dramatic. But standing there now, she discovered justice often sounded like paper sliding across wood and people suddenly telling the truth because silence cost more. Eleanor lifted one final page and placed it in front of Richard. "Temporary asset freeze," she said. "Effective tonight." He stared at the order without touching it. The gold watch on his wrist suddenly looked heavy. "You set this up," he said to Aaliyah, voice thin with disbelief. She met his eyes without anger. "No, sir," she answered. "You did. I only stayed long enough to see it served." The manager near the doorway looked at her as if noticing her for the first time. A server carrying fresh plates stopped in the hall, then quietly turned around. Somewhere beyond the private room, dishes clinked, laughter rose from another table, and the city continued pretending power lasted forever. Leonard Shaw pushed Richard's contract away with 2 fingers. "Meeting is over," he said. Chairs moved back. Phones lit up. Advisors stepped into corners whispering damage control. Daniel Pierce reached for the forged papers, then thought better of it and withdrew his hand. Eleanor closed her portfolio. "Miss Carter," she said, "we will need your statement." Aaliyah nodded once. Richard sank back into his chair and looked older than when dinner began. The room that had laughed with him 20 minutes ago now arranged itself around his absence. Aaliyah untied her apron strings, folded the black fabric neatly and laid it on the table beside the contract that had carried her father's name. Then she turned toward the door. As she reached it, Richard spoke again, softer now. "What do you want?" She paused without facing him. Rain tapped the windows like distant applause. "What you took returned," she said. "And for once, your signature to mean nothing." Then she walked into the hallway, where the city lights waited like witnesses. The hallway outside the private dining room felt cooler, quieter, almost honest. Aaliyah Carter stood beside a wall of dark glass and let herself breathe for the first time that night. Below, Manhattan moved in ribbons of headlights and wet pavement, every taxi horn softened by the rain. Her hands were steady, but her knees carried the memory of everything they had held up for years. 2 jobs, late tuition bills, her mother's prescriptions, the weight of being told to wait while people with cleaner shoes rewrote history. Behind the closed doors, voices rose and fell in sharp bursts. Lawyers, investors, assistants, suddenly loyal to truth. She did not turn back. The restaurant manager approached carefully, as if afraid sound itself might offend her. Martin Cole had managed the dining room for 9 years and could identify wealthy customers by the way they tipped before dessert. Tonight, he looked smaller than usual. "Miss Carter," he said softly, "I owe you an apology." Aaliyah studied him for a moment. He was the man who once told her to smile more because difficult guests preferred cheerful invisibility. The man who had warned staff never to embarrass powerful people, as though power were a fragile antique. "For what part?" she asked. His eyes dropped. "For not seeing you." The words were simple, but they carried more truth than elegance. She nodded once. "That is how it usually works." Martin swallowed and offered a folded envelope. "Your final paycheck. And tips from the room." She did not take it. "Keep the tips," she said. "Use them to replace every resume you threw away because the names sounded wrong." He flinched, not from anger, but recognition. A young hostess at the front stand pretended to straighten menus while listening with wide eyes. A busser paused mid-step, tray balanced on one shoulder. People notice courage fastest when it costs them nothing. The private room doors opened again. Eleanor Grant emerged first, portfolio closed, expression composed. Daniel Pierce followed behind her with the look of a man whose reflection had turned against him. He avoided Aaliyah's eyes and moved toward the elevator bank. "Mr. Pierce," she said. He stopped. Rain tapped against the windows. "Did you know my father?" He hesitated too long. "I met him once." And he stared at the carpet. He believed signatures meant something. Aaliyah felt the ache of that sentence settle inside her. "They still do," she said. "Just not yours." He pressed the elevator button and did not speak again. Eleanor stepped beside her. "We found enough for indictments, freezes, and civil recovery," she said quietly. "But there is more. There always is." Eleanor's eyes softened. "Your father kept records off-site. Storage unit in Newark. Paid cash every month until the year he died. We only found it yesterday." For a second, the hallway disappeared. Aaliyah saw her father again in rolled sleeves and tired eyes, tapping file folders straight on a desk because order was the only power he could always afford. "What is inside?" she asked. "We do not know yet. The warrant clears by morning." Aaliyah looked back at the closed dining room doors. Somewhere beyond them, Richard Whitmore was likely negotiating with consequences the way he once negotiated land. "I want to be there," she said. "You should be." Martin cleared his throat nervously. "If you need references for future employment," Aaliyah almost smiled. "I think tonight updated my resume." The hostess covered a laugh, then quickly looked down. The elevator chimed. Daniel Pierce stepped in without turning around. As the doors closed, his reflection split down the center seam and vanished. Eleanor checked her watch. "Get some rest. Car picks you up at 8. I have another shift at a diner in Queens at 6. Eleanor blinked. "Not anymore." She handed Aaliyah a business card embossed in silver. "Consulting fee for cooperation begins tonight." Aaliyah took the card carefully, like something breakable. She had carried trays heavier than hope. The dining room doors opened one final time. Richard Whitmore walked out alone. No entourage, no investors, no polished certainty. His tie was loosened, collar open, hair touched by the humidity of panic. He stopped 10 feet away. Aaliyah. She did not move. He looked around, perhaps searching for the version of the world where people still cleared space for him. It was gone. "I did not know about your father." You signed the profits anyway. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The city lights painted pale lines across the floor between them. Can I make this right? He asked. Aaliyah considered the man who had confused control with respect for so long he could no longer hear the difference. No, she said gently. But you can stop making it worse. Eleanor stepped forward. Mr. Whitmore, counsel will contact you. He nodded like a student dismissed after failing an exam no money could retake. He walked toward the elevator slowly, each step sounding louder than the last. When he was gone, the hallway seemed larger, cleaner. Aaliyah slipped Eleanor's card into her pocket and looked out at the rain-washed skyline. Somewhere across the river, in a locked storage unit no one valued enough to steal, her father had left one more sentence waiting to be read. At 7:58 the next morning, Newark looked like it had been rinsed clean. Rainwater clung to chain-link fences, puddles mirrored gray sky, and the rows of storage buildings sat quiet as sleeping freight cars. Aaliyah Carter stepped out of a black sedan, wearing the same coat she had worn to work for 3 winters, though today it felt lighter on her shoulders. Eleanor Grant was already there, speaking with 2 investigators near Unit C, 117. One held a clipboard. Another rolled up the yellow seal that had been placed overnight. No cameras. No reporters. Truth often arrived before headlines did. You made it, Eleanor said. Queen's Diner was not happy. Aaliyah gave a faint smile. They can survive one missed breakfast shift. Her breath fogged in the cold morning air. The metal doors around them glistened with moisture, each one hiding someone's version of what mattered enough to keep and not enough to keep close. Unit C, 117 looked ordinary. Faded blue paint. Rust near the latch. A small sticker from 10 years ago that read in "No cash kept on site." Her father loved jokes no one else noticed. The investigator cut the final plastic tie and stepped back. Whenever you are ready. Aaliyah moved forward. Her hand paused on the handle. She remembered another door long ago, the office on Madison Avenue where Harold Carter once built affordable housing proposals for neighborhoods banks had ignored. He used to let her spin in his desk chair while he said things like, "Buildings are easy, baby girl. Trust is the hard part." Then the contracts dried up. Calls stopped returning. Meetings got postponed forever. And one winter the office door never opened again. She lifted the handle now and rolled the metal shutter upward. The sound echoed through the narrow lane like thunder made of aluminum. Dust stirred in pale morning light. Inside, nothing looked valuable to the wrong kind of person. 2. Filing cabinets. 12 banker boxes. A dented drafting table. 3 framed photos wrapped in plastic. A coffee mug with the old company crest. Aaliyah stepped inside slowly. The smell of paper, cedar, and time met her first. She touched the drafting table and closed her eyes. Here was the ruler he tapped against plans when thinking. Here was the lamp he repaired with electrical tape instead of replacing because money should be used where it mattered. Here was the silence that follows unfinished work. Eleanor entered behind her, softer than usual. Was a single key and a folded letter. "Baby girl, if this reaches you, then you already know I was right about some things and wrong about others. I thought fighting alone was strength. It is not. It is only loneliness dressed up as pride. Find people who honor truth and let them help carry it. Also, the key is for the top drawer of my drafting table. I hid your college fund there because I did not trust banks or brothers-in-law. Love always, Dad." A laugh escaped her before the tears did. Real, surprised, warm. Eleanor looked over gently. "Good news." Aaliyah wiped her face. "He still found a way to embarrass me and save me at the same time." She crossed to the drafting table and slid the small brass key into the top drawer. It stuck once, then turned. Inside were neat bundles of savings bonds, 2 cashier's checks, and a folder labeled Aaliyah tuition. Beneath that sat one final document in a sealed sleeve. Eleanor leaned closer. "What is it?" Aaliyah read the title slowly. "Original Deed Transfer Refusal. Signed by Harold Carter. And signed by Richard Whitmore." The room went still. Her father had never sold. He had refused. Which meant every deal after that began with a lie. Outside, a train horn sounded somewhere beyond the warehouses. Long and low. Aaliyah looked around the dusty unit filled with boxes no thief wanted and felt something shift inside her. This was not the end of what had been taken. It was the beginning of what could be returned. By noon, the conference room on the 26th floor of the State Financial Crimes Bureau smelled like coffee, printer toner, and expensive panic. Aaliyah Carter sat at the far end of a polished oak table where people in suits now offered her water before she asked. The same city that once looked through her had suddenly learned eye contact. Boxes from Unit C, 117 lined one wall, numbered and sealed. Screens glowed with property maps, transfer chains, and highlighted signatures. Eleanor Grant stood near the center, sleeves rolled once, reading from a summary prepared at sunrise. "We have evidence of fraudulent acquisition activity spanning at least 14 years, she said. Multiple shell entities, falsified board approvals, coercive refinancing structures, and unlawful title transfers concentrated in historically undervalued neighborhoods." The words were clinical. The damage they described was not. Aaliyah watched red dots spread across a digital map of Brooklyn, Newark, Baltimore, and Southside Chicago. Apartments converted. Family lots seized. Small storefronts folded into luxury corridors no one who built them could afford to enter. Her father had not lost one company. He had stumbled onto a system. And Richard Whitmore asked an assistant attorney general. Eleanor clicked a remote. A timeline appeared. Fund launches. Acquisitions. Political donations. Public speeches about urban renewal. He profited, she said. Whether he designed every mechanism remains under review. But he signed, approved, benefited, and concealed. The room went quiet in the respectful way rooms do when truth becomes expensive. Aaliyah's phone vibrated face down on the table. Unknown number. Then again. Then again. She ignored it until Eleanor glanced over. "Take it." Aaliyah stepped into the hallway and answered. "Miss Carter." Richard Whitmore's voice sounded smaller through a phone than across a dinner table. "I would appreciate 10 minutes. You had 14 years. Please." She looked through the glass wall at investigators unpacking the lies that once were cufflinks. "Why?" "Because there is something you need before they find it first." She almost ended the call. Almost. "Where?" "Lobby of the Whitmore Tower. 1 o'clock. Bring counsel." "No," he said quietly. "This time, just bring yourself." The line went dead. At 12:57, the lobby of Whitmore Tower gleamed with white stone and curated silence. Aaliyah entered through revolving glass doors where she had once delivered catering trays through a side entrance because staff were asked not to use the front. Today the security guard stood up before she reached the desk. "Miss Carter," he said, nervous and polite. "Penthouse elevator is unlocked." Memory has a cruel sense of humor. The elevator rose 47 floors in smooth silence. Her reflection in mirrored walls looked composed enough to be mistaken for calm. When the doors opened, Richard Whitmore stood alone in a vast office wrapped in windows. No assistants. No attorney. No audience to mistake confidence for character. He wore no jacket. Only a white shirt with sleeves undone at the cuffs. The skyline behind him looked colder than usual. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Say what you called to say." He nodded once and slid a slim folder across the desk. "My brother, Stephen, handled early acquisitions. He died 6 years ago. Everyone assumed the worst ended with him." "Did it?" Richard's eyes drifted to the city below. "No. I kept taking returns from structures I chose not to inspect." He gave a bitter half-smile. "That is the elegant phrase men like me use for greed." Aaliyah opened the folder. Internal memos. Recorded calls. Offshore authorizations. Names she recognized from her father's notebook and several she did not. One memo carried Richard's initials beside a note that read delay Carter litigation until liquidity event closes. Her pulse slowed instead of quickened. "Confirmation can feel colder than suspicion." "You knew," she said. "Enough to stop it," he answered. "Not enough to pretend innocence." He walked to the window and placed one hand against the glass. "Do you know what frightened me most last night?" She did not answer. "You were not angry." He turned back. "Anger I understand. I built systems around surviving it. But dignity." He shook his head. "There is no defense against dignity when you have none." Aaliyah closed the folder. "Why give me this?" "Because they will bury blame on the dead, the junior, the absent, the convenient. And because your father once came to see me." The room seemed to narrow. "When?" "The week before he died." Richard swallowed. "He brought proposals for mixed-income housing and a warning about Stephen's tactics. I dismissed him in under 3 minutes." Aaliyah said nothing. Silence can accuse more precisely than speech. "He left a business card on my desk," Richard continued. "On the back he wrote, You can still become the man your money introduces. Richard looked down. I kept it. From a drawer, he removed a worn card and placed it beside the folder. Harold Carter. Founder. Carter. Urban Holdings. Blue crest faded at the corners. Her father's handwriting on the back, steady and clean. Aaliyah touched the card with 2 fingers. For one brief second, grief and pride occupied the same breath. You had years to listen, she said. I know. And now? He straightened. Now I testify. Publicly. Fully. No immunity demands. She studied him carefully. Men like Richard often confused surrender with strategy. But fear leaves a different scent than calculation. This looked like fear mixed with relief. If you lie once, she said, I walk out of any room you enter forever. Fair. Her phone buzzed again. Eleanor Grant. Aaliyah answered. We have a problem, Eleanor said without greeting. Someone moved money through 3 foreign accounts 1 hour ago. The authorization code traces to Whitmore Tower. Aaliyah's eyes lifted slowly to Richard. He had gone pale before she spoke. That cannot be me, he said. Then from somewhere deeper in the penthouse, a door clicked open. The soft click of that interior door sounded louder than the sirens beginning to rise somewhere far below the tower. Aaliyah Carter turned first. Richard Whitmore did not move at all. He simply closed his eyes for half a second, as if recognizing a mistake he had been expecting to meet. From the private corridor beyond the office emerged a woman in a cream coat, carrying a tablet and a structured handbag that probably cost more than Aaliyah's first car. Her hair was pinned perfectly. Her expression was not. Richard, she said, stopping short when she saw Aaliyah. You did not tell me you had company. Vanessa, he replied quietly. You should not be here. Vanessa Whitmore ignored him and walked toward the desk with the smooth confidence of someone accustomed to rooms adjusting around her. She placed the tablet down, screen lit with rows of numbers, currency symbols, and transfer confirmations. The Zurich release completed, she said. Singapore is pending because compliance requested a secondary token. Then she noticed the folder open on the desk. Her eyes sharpened. What is this? Aaliyah watched Richard's face lose the final traces of control. Tell me you did not use my credentials, he said. Vanessa laughed once, a short, elegant sound with no warmth in it. Your credentials? Richard, half this building exists because I fixed what your family inherited and nearly wasted. She turned to Aaliyah with a smile polished enough to cut glass. And you must be the waitress from the news alerts. Server, Aaliyah said evenly. Formerly. Vanessa's smile thinned. How inspiring. Richard stepped between them, not dramatically, simply instinctively. Cancel every transfer. No. The word landed like a lock engaging. Those funds are protected assets. They are evidence. They are survival. Vanessa snapped, then immediately smoothed her tone back into silk. Do not become noble now because it photographs well. Aaliyah's phone was still connected to Eleanor Grant. She could hear keyboard clicks, urgent voices, the machinery of law waking fully. Keep her talking, Eleanor said quietly in her ear. Aaliyah lowered the phone slightly, but did not hang up. Vanessa finally noticed. Are we being recorded? Only by consequences, Aaliyah answered. Rain drifted across the windows in thin silver lines. 47 floors below, traffic crawled through puddled avenues. Up here, the room felt strangely small. Vanessa picked up the tablet and tapped rapidly. You always lacked stamina, Richard. That is why your brother handled acquisition and I handled preservation. She glanced at Aaliyah. Men enjoy pretending they lead. Someone always has to do the arithmetic. Richard stared at her. Stephen is dead. Yes, she said coolly. Which is why he cannot contradict anyone. The sentence changed the air. Aaliyah felt it at once. Not guilt. Not grief. Strategy. Richard took one slow step back. How much of this was you? Vanessa met his gaze without blinking. Enough. He looked suddenly older than he had in the restaurant. Older even than in defeat. The forged deeds. Necessary. The shell boards. Efficient. Harold Carter? For the first time, Vanessa's expression flickered. Only slightly. Obstructive. Aaliyah's hand tightened around the phone. What did you do to my father? Vanessa turned toward her, mildly annoyed now, as if forced into an unnecessary meeting. Your father loved principle more than leverage. Men like that often confuse refusal with protection. He had chances to settle. Answer the question. Vanessa shrugged. I did not need to do anything. Pressure does the work for you when the world already ignores certain people. The room went still enough to hear the rain. Richard's voice came out low and rough. You told me Carter sold. I told you what kept deals moving. You said he was compensated. Compared to what this city usually offers people like him, he was. Aaliyah did not speak. Some cruelty arrives loud. Some arrives wearing education and perfect posture. Eleanor's voice returned through the phone. Federal agents are in the building. Stall 2 more minutes. Richard reached for the tablet. Vanessa pulled it back. Do not be foolish. I already was. He looked at Aaliyah then, not asking forgiveness, only acknowledging debt. You were right about me. I know, she said. Vanessa gave a dismissive exhale. How dramatic. A disgraced husband, a righteous stranger, and suddenly everyone discovers ethics. She moved toward the corridor. Richard blocked the path. Move. No, you think this changes anything? She asked. Money already moved. Then stay and explain it. She glanced toward the private hall where a service elevator likely waited. I do not explain myself to servants. The insult hung in the room, stale and familiar. Aaliyah straightened, calm as winter glass. That is why you keep losing to them. Vanessa's eyes narrowed for the first time. Somewhere beyond the main doors came a firm knock, then another. Security voices. Official voices. Timed footsteps. Eleanor again in Aaliyah's ear. They are outside. Vanessa heard enough to understand. She set the tablet down carefully, as if choosing optics over speed. Then she removed a ring from her right hand and placed it beside Richard's watch on the desk. Keep the tower, she said. You never owned the foundation anyway. She turned just as the office doors opened. 2 federal agents entered with badges visible, followed by Eleanor Grant carrying a warrant folder still damp from the rain. Nobody rushed. Nobody shouted. Real endings rarely need volume. Eleanor's eyes swept the room and settled on the tablet. That will do nicely. Vanessa smiled with practiced elegance. Counsel is on the way. Bring umbrellas, Eleanor said. It is going to be a long week. Richard lowered himself into a chair like gravity had finally become personal. Aaliyah looked past them all to the skyline her father once tried to build fairly. The clouds were breaking in the west. Thin sunlight touched the wet glass of distant buildings, one by one. The rain was gone by late afternoon, but the city still carried its shine. News vans lined the curb outside Whitmore Tower, their satellite dishes tilted toward a sky finally turning blue. Inside, the 47th floor had become quieter than any courtroom. Agents moved in measured paths. Assistants carried boxes once considered untouchable. Computer screens went dark one by one. Wealth always looks smaller when packed into cardboard. Aaliyah Carter stood near the window where Richard Whitmore had earlier watched the city as if it belonged to him. Below, umbrellas folded, traffic restarted, pedestrians hurried past history without knowing it had changed above them. Eleanor Grant reviewed signatures beside a conference table now covered in evidence tags. Vanessa Whitmore had been escorted downstairs without drama, still composed enough to suggest inconvenience rather than collapse. Some people mistake posture for innocence until the handcuffs of reputation arrive later. Richard remained seated at his desk, jacket draped over the chair behind him, tie removed, sleeves wrinkled. He looked like a man meeting himself for the first time and finding poor company. Miss Carter, he said quietly. She did not turn immediately. The glass was cool beneath her fingertips. You can call me Aaliyah now. I am not on your payroll. He accepted the correction with a nod. Aaliyah. The name sounded unfamiliar in his mouth, as if respect were a language he had learned too late. I need to tell you something before counsel buries it in procedure. She faced him then. Try honesty. It is trending today. A tired breath almost became a laugh and failed. He opened the center drawer of his desk and removed a sealed envelope, yellowed at the edges. Harold Carter's name was written across the front in blue ink. Aaliyah felt the room narrow around the letters. What is that? The proposal your father brought me 12 years ago. Richard placed it on the desk carefully. I kept it because I knew it was better than anything we built after. Aaliyah did not move closer yet. Then why reject it? He looked down at his hands. Because it gave ownership to residents. Shared equity. Long-term affordability. Community voting rights. He swallowed. There was less profit in fairness. Silence settled between them like dust in sunlight. Eleanor glanced over once, then respectfully turned away. Richard continued. Your father told me neighborhoods do not need saviors. They need partners who can count without stealing. His eyes reddened, not dramatically, simply humanly. I called him unrealistic. Aaliyah stepped to the desk and touched the envelope. The paper was warm from his hand. He called himself patient, she said. At home, anyway. Richard nodded slowly. He left after 10 minutes. At the door, he turned back and said, "One day you will own enough buildings to hear how empty they sound." The office around them seemed to prove the point. Phones silent. Hallways stripped of urgency. Expensive art suddenly decorative and nothing more. Aaliyah opened the envelope. Inside were architectural renderings, hand-drawn notes, financing models, and a typed cover letter proposing mixed income, housing with local business incubators on the ground floor, childcare on the second level, rooftop gardens above. On the last page her father had written in pen, "Profit can be measured in dollars or dignity. Cities remember which you chose." Her eyes blurred for a moment. She blinked them clear. "He never stopped building," she whispered. Richard stood slowly. "I want to fund this now." She looked up sharply. No, the word hit clean and immediate. He froze. "Listen first. I listened last night when you told a server to leave. I listened this morning when you asked for 10 minutes after 14 years. I listened while you discovered morality because..." Handcuffs entered the building. Her voice never rose. It did not need to. You do not get redemption by writing another check. He absorbed each sentence without defense. "Then tell me what I do." Aaliyah closed the folder and aligned its edges the way her father used to. "You testify fully. You return what can be returned. You step aside from every board you polluted. And if there is money left after that, it goes into a blind trust with no building named after you." Richard stared at her, then lowered his eyes. "Agreed. Also," she added, "you will read every page of my father's proposal under oath when asked why you rejected it." For the first time that day, something like shame and gratitude crossed his face together. "That is fair." Eleanor approached with 2 documents and a pen. "Mr. Whitmore, cooperation statement. Voluntary." He signed without reading. A habit, Aaliyah thought, though at least this time it served truth. An agent carried out the framed skyline photo from behind his desk. Dust marked the wall where it had hung for years. Richard looked at the empty rectangle. "I used to think power was being the last person in the room," he said softly. Aaliyah slipped Harold Carter's proposal into her bag. "No," she replied. "Power is being the person who can leave it." She turned and walked toward the elevator. No one stopped her. In the lobby, reporters shouted names, cameras flashed, producers pointed toward exits like hunters scenting spectacle. Security opened a side door for her into the quieter street. The evening air smelled of wet pavement and roasted nuts from a cart on the corner. Across the avenue, sunlight struck a vacant lot fenced with rusted wire. Aaliyah paused. The sign out front listed the parcel owner in temporary receivership. She knew that address from the proposal in her bag. Her father's first planned building. And taped crookedly to the fence was a fresh city notice. Development review reopened. 3 weeks later, the vacant lot on Madison and 118th no longer looked abandoned. The rusted fence had been removed. Survey flags fluttered in neat rows. Fresh gravel covered old weeds. Men and women in hard hats studied plans clipped to boards while city inspectors moved through the site with measured steps. Aaliyah Carter stood at the sidewalk edge holding a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes earlier. She had not noticed. In front of her, what had once been a forgotten parcel wrapped in lawsuits was now the first property returned through court receivership. Her father's first planned building. The one he said would prove neighborhoods did not need rescuing. Only investment without extraction. Morning light climbed the nearby brick walls inch by inch. A television van idled across the street, but no cameras had been invited inside the fence. Today was not for spectacle. It was for foundations. Eleanor Grant approached carrying a hard hat tucked under one arm and a folder under the other. "You are late," Aaliyah said. Eleanor checked her watch. "I am 3 minutes early. That is late for lawyers when microphones are present." Eleanor almost smiled and handed her the folder. Final trust documents. Resident board structure approved. Scholarship fund seated. Commercial leases capped for local businesses. Aaliyah opened the file and scanned names, signatures, voting provisions, anti-displacement clauses. Real protection written in real language. "No naming rights?" she asked. "You were serious about that?" Buildings should honor service, not ego. Eleanor nodded toward the gate. Then you should read page 6. Aaliyah turned to it. Project designation, Carter Commons Initiative. She looked up sharply. I said no monuments. It is not a monument, Eleanor replied. It is a map back to who started it. Wind moved lightly through the open lot. Somewhere nearby, a jackhammer started and stopped, the city clearing its throat. A black sedan pulled to the curb across the street. No reporters noticed because no cameras were pointed that way. Richard Whitmore stepped out alone. Dark coat, no tie, no entourage. He stood on the sidewalk without crossing, like a man who understood lines at last. Aaliyah watched him for a moment, then returned to the folder. He is not supposed to be here, Eleanor said. Neither was I at dinner. Richard waited until Eleanor walked a few yards away to speak with engineers. Then he approached the fence opening slowly, stopping several feet from Aaliyah. I will leave if you ask. Then why come? He held out a flat package wrapped in brown paper. Records from my brother's private archive. We found them in a storage vault after the warrants. They belong to you. She did not take it immediately. Why not hand them to investigators? Copies already went to them. He looked at the ground, then back at the rising steel markers on the lot. These belonged to your family before they became evidence. She accepted the package. It was lighter than expected. Thank you. The words surprised them both. Richard gave a small nod. Gratitude sounds different when no one is listening. I testified yesterday, he said. For hours. I know. They asked why I ignored warnings for so long. What did you say? He exhaled slowly. That greed is rarely loud. Usually it arrives dressed as routine. Aaliyah considered that. Honest, if late. And now, she asked. Now I sell what remains, fund restitution, and disappear from every board that mistook wealth for wisdom. He glanced at the workers setting rebar stakes. Then maybe I learn how to be useful where nobody applauds. A foreman called for site clearance. The first excavator rolled forward, treads pressing into earth long denied its purpose. Aaliyah looked at the machine, then at Richard. Do one useful thing now. Name it. She handed him a pair of work gloves resting on a nearby crate. Help move those lumber bundles to the east stack. No cameras. No statements. 2 hours. He blinked once, then took the gloves. Leather met hands more familiar with pens. That is all. For this morning. He almost smiled. Fair enough. By noon, sweat darkened the collar of his shirt. Dust marked his coat sleeves. Nobody on site treated him as special because nobody there had time for theater. He carried boards, followed instructions, and learned quickly that weight ignores status. Aaliyah reviewed blueprints under a temporary canopy with 2 architects and a neighborhood council member who had fought the original seizure 12 years earlier. Childcare room here, she said, tapping the plan. Windows lower so kids can see the garden. Done, said the architect. Retail bays should prioritize tenants already within 5 blocks. Done. And rooftop plots reserved for residents first. Done. Decisions moved fast when profit was no longer in charge. Later, as workers packed tools and sunlight turned amber against nearby windows, Richard returned the gloves to the crate. His palms were reddened, expression humbled, breathing honest. I had forgotten, he said. Forgotten what? That things are built by people who never get invited to the ribbon cutting. Aaliyah looked over the lot where markers now outlined future walls, hallways, kitchens, lives. Then remember who to thank when it opens. He nodded and stepped back toward the sidewalk. No handshake. No dramatic forgiveness. Some debts are not paid in gestures. They are paid in years. Before leaving, he turned once more. Your father was right about the empty buildings. Aaliyah tucked the brown package under one arm and faced the foundation trench as machines powered down around her. Then helped fill one with something better. Richard crossed the street without another word. In the cooling evening light, workers began pouring the first line of concrete exactly where Harold Carter had drawn it 12 years before. 6 months later, the building rose where an empty lot once collected trash, rainwater, and excuses. Steel had become walls. Walls had become hallways. Hallways now carried the smell of fresh paint, cut lumber, and coffee brewed too early by electricians who arrived before sunrise. Morning light poured through wide lobby windows designed low enough for children to see the street outside. Above the entrance, simple brushed letters read Carter Commons. No bronze statue. No donor wall. No oversized ego carved in stone. Just a name returned to the block that had almost forgotten it. Aaliyah Carter stood in the lobby wearing a navy coat and work boots dusted white at the toes. In one hand, she held a ring of keys the property manager insisted looked ceremonial. In the other, she carried the worn envelope that had once held her father's proposal. The paper edges were soft now, from being opened too many times. Residents gathered in clusters near folding chairs and potted trees waiting to be placed. A retired schoolteacher from apartment 3B, a barber and his wife from 5A, a nurse with twin boys already racing the corridor under polite supervision, the owner of a bakery moving into the first retail space. None of them had been chosen for publicity value. They had been chosen because the rules were written for people instead of around them. Eleanor Grant adjusted a microphone near the front desk and frowned at the feedback squeal. "I preferred courtrooms," she muttered. "They echo less." Aaliyah smiled. "You say comforting things at celebrations." Eleanor handed her a folded program. 5 minutes. "Also, your speech is too short." "That was intentional." "I know. It bothers me." Outside, reporters waited behind barriers, but only local press had been invited in. Today was not about scandal. It was about occupancy. Through the glass doors, a delivery truck backed carefully toward the curb with boxes labeled childcare books and community clinic supplies. Real wealth arrives in cartons more often than limousines. A quiet stir moved through the lobby as another figure entered from the side entrance carrying 2 cardboard boxes stacked to his chin. Richard Whitmore set them down near the leasing office and wiped dust from his hands. Plain jacket. No logo. No assistants. Since the hearings, he had become strangely punctual whenever unpaid work was available. Some people called it image repair. The people who watched him scrub paint from stair rails at 7 in the morning called it labor. Aaliyah walked over. "You are late." He checked his watch automatically, then caught the joke half a second later. "By 40 seconds. Decline continues." He nodded toward the boxes. "Tenant welcome packets." Someone forgot them downstairs. Someone. Me. Their conversations had become like that now. Sparse. Honest enough. He glanced around the lobby where residents laughed softly and children chased each other around stacked chairs. "It looks better than the drawings." Aaliyah followed his gaze. "It looks occupied." That was always the point. The ceremony began without fanfare. No orchestra. No dramatic curtain. Just folding chairs filled by people who intended to live there. Eleanor introduced the legal trust board, the resident council, the scholarship committee, and the small business incubator already fully subscribed. Then she stepped aside and waved Aaliyah forward. Applause rose warm and immediate, not because she was famous, but because everyone in the room knew what had been returned. Aaliyah stood at the microphone and unfolded no notes. "My father used to say buildings remember the hands that made them," she began. The lobby settled into stillness. For a long time, this city remembered the wrong hands. Today that changes. She looked toward the families, the workers, the children leaning against chair legs. This place is not charity. It is not a favor. It is what should have happened years ago. A little boy in the front row raised his hand as if in class. Laughter rippled softly. "And if you live here," Aaliyah continued, smiling now, "please help me with one rule. Know your neighbors. Hold doors. Share recipes. Return tools. Vote in every building meeting. And if someone powerful ever tells you to leave a room that belongs to you," she paused as several people leaned in, "pull up a chair." The applause this time lasted longer. Even Richard clapped, slower than the rest, eyes lowered. Afterward came keys, signatures, elevators opening and closing, children choosing bedrooms by running to them first. In apartment 4C, the retired teacher cried quietly over sunlight in the kitchen. In 2A, the nurse measured where bunk beds would go. In the ground floor bakery, flour dust already coated the counter before opening day. Life wastes no time moving in when given a chance. Near sunset, when most guests had gone and the reporters packed cables into vans, Aaliyah climbed alone to the rooftop garden. Raised planters lined the edges. Young tomato vines trembled in the evening breeze. The skyline glowed gold beyond the river. She removed Harold Carter's old company mug from her bag and set it on the ledge beside the envelope. Footsteps approached, then stopped at a respectful distance. "Richard, I came to return." "Something," he said. He held out a small brass nameplate polished clean. "Whitmore Executive Suite." removed from his former office. I thought the medal might be useful